So this week I've got a super exciting tutorial for you that's going to ramp up your images to a level you never thought possible. I'm going to show you how to create HDR panoramas inside of Camera Raw in Photoshop. And if you do it in Lightroom, it's exactly the same way. Hey Cafe crew, it's Colin Smith here from photoshopcafe.com, the very best place to learn Photoshop and Lightroom. So I've been shooting HDR panoramas for a number of years now, and every time I share one, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, people are always asking, how did I do it? And in fact, the steps are not that difficult. I mean, it took me a long time to figure this out, years of experimentation, but I'm going to break it down to some very, very simple steps for you today so that you're going to be able to do it whether you're using a mobile phone or maybe you're using an SLR camera like a Canon or a Sony, or maybe you're using a drone. You might have a, Mavic Air or Mavic Pro 2, whatever you've got, it doesn't really matter. These steps are going to be exactly the same. Now, this particular one I'm doing, I actually used a Phantom 4 Pro for shooting the pictures I'm going to show you. But essentially what we want to do is we want to shoot our photos and then we're going to put them together. It's really simple. What you want to think about is a panorama. One is the vista we're looking at. What is it we're going to shoot? So you want to have a start point and an end point. So maybe it's a little too wide to fit in one shot. So as you know, you can take your camera and you can shoot like this. In fact, if you want more detail, pop it over in portrait mode and shoot it that way, because then it's going to give you more sky and more of the foreground down the bottom. Maybe it's water or whatever, you're going to get more. So what you want to do is take those photographs with a 30% overlap minimum. Now that's on an SLR. On a drone, I do the same thing. I'll fly up in the air, I'll rotate the drone, point where I want to start, take the picture, go to the next spot, take the picture, and go to the next spot and take the picture. And that's how you shoot a panorama. Now, an HDR panorama is extending the dynamic range. Now, you might not necessarily have to do it so much with an SLR, especially some of the newer ones with, a lot more dynamic range. But when you're working with things like a drone and you're working with a very bright sky and a very dark foreground, you're not going to have enough dynamic range, meaning that if you expose for that sky to bring out the detail in the clouds, the foreground, those rocks, those mountains are just going to be black. They're going to be very, very dark of little detail. If you expose for the foreground area, which is your rocks, your houses, whatever it is you're shooting, your sky can get blown out and you can lose that detail in the clouds. So we bracket the shots. We take multiple shots. We generally take 3 shots when we're doing an HDR. And that way we get a nice bright photo, which brings out all the detail in the dark areas. And then we do the regular photo, and then we do a very dark photo, which opens up all that detail and shows all that detail in the sky. Now with a drone such as this, they only have 0.7 stops in between. So that means that you want to use 5, and you can use all 5 when you're merging it. You'll see in a second what I mean. Or you can throw away 2 of them, just use the darkest, the lightest, and the medium one, which is what we're going to do for this tutorial. When I take it, I set this to auto exposure bracket. I point it this way. I take 3 shots. Then I rotate around with a 30 to 50% overlap, take 3 more shots, and then I rotate it around again with a 30 to 50% overlap, and then I'll take 3 to 5 more shots. So once I set up the bracketing, all you do is you click and it goes click, 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 click for 3, or click, click, for 5, So all you're doing is click, you wait for it, turn it, click, turn again and click. So it's only 3 shots you're taking, but you end up with 15 photographs. If you're doing 5, you end up with 9 if you're doing 3. Hopefully that makes sense. So anyway, I know that was a little bit getting into the photography part. Let me know in the comments if you want me to actually go out and do a tutorial on shooting HDRs and panoramas with the cameras on location. Very happy to do that, and I have tons of training on it. Okay, so if you want to know more about HDRs and panoramas, I'm going to give you a link underneath to my free HDR tutorial, which, believe it or not, is one of the most popular HDR tutorials in the world. It's been viewed millions of times. A lot of good information in there, and it's free. You don't have to sign up or anything. Just enjoy it. So I've actually been preparing right now. I'm speaking 7 times at Adobe Max next week. That's Adobe Max conference. If you're going to be there in LA, please come along to my sessions. I'd love to see you. But while preparing for that, I came across this kind of lesson. I thought, this would be really good to share with people here on the YouTube channel at Photoshop Cafe. So why don't we jump in right now and I'll show you these steps. Like I said, these are the steps that we're going to be doing inside of Camera Raw. We don't need anything but Photoshop. But if you don't have Photoshop and you only have Lightroom, it's exactly the same steps. So what we want to do is we're going to choose File, Open. And then here you'll see there's 9 shots, and you'll see that there's, a dark, a light, and a medium shot for each one of these. So it's a 3-shot panorama. So we're just going to click open. And then what happens inside of Camera Raw when you open multiple photos is you get this film strip on the side. But once again, if you're working in Lightroom, you just select all of these inside the library module, and then we'll move into the develop module when we do the adjustments, just like we're going to do here. Okay, so the first one we've got here is we can see this is the regular shot. This is about what you would get. Notice the sky is a little bit blown out. We don't really see any detail because it's a misty day. And a lot of these details are getting a little lost in the shadows. Not too bad. Sometimes it's a lot worse than this, but this is the middle of the day. Around sunset, this would be very, very dark. So then we do another shot here, which is a darker shot, shows more detail here in the clouds, and this will really pop out when we make these adjustments. And then of course the third one, which you won't see any detail in the sky, but look at all this detail here in the ground. So we want to merge the 3 of them together. So I'm going to hold the shift key and click. Notice I've got those 3 selected. So in order to create an HDR panorama, the first thing we have to do is we have to make the HDRs. Once we've made the HDRs, we're going to put those together into the panorama. So why don't we right click on here, and then we're just going to choose merge to HDR. And right now it's going to pop open, and we've got some options here. We can align the images. You definitely want to do that, and we could start some tone adjustments. If I turn that off, it's just going to look like that. All that information is there. It's just doing an auto adjustment, and we can see, oh look, there's detail there in the sky. Let's turn off the auto adjustment for now. We'll do this manually later, and we're just going to click merge. And what we're going to do now is we're going to want to save this. It's going to create another DNG file. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call it HDR. And I'm just going to click here and let it create the first HDR. So it's creating right now. It's merging together. It's done. And it created a DNG file. Okay, let's scroll down now, and I want to go to the next set of 3 images. So we've got 1, 2, 3. And once again, the things we talked about here, we can see there's our regular exposure, there's the darker exposure, shows more detail, and you get the idea. So we're going to right click, and we're just going to merge to HDR. And once again, it's going to ask us if we want to save this DNG. So we're just going to notice it, remember the last settings, we're going to click merge, and we're just going to save it under there. Great. And now let's scroll down to the last 3. And you can see here, this particular image, we really need the dynamic range, because you can see there's a lot of detail here, and a lot of detail gets lost there. So I'm selecting those together, right click, merge to HDR. And it's going to ask me to merge it and save it. Okay, great. So now what we've done is we should have 12 images in here. And you'll notice that some of them have these little icons, and these are the HDRs. So we're just going to select those. So that's 1, 2, and let's scroll up to the top, and 3. So right now, we've selected the 3 HDR images. Now we're going to take those HDR images, which stands for high dynamic range, and we're going to merge those into a panorama, which is going to give us a sweeping panorama with unprecedented detail in the shadows and the highlights. So we're just going to right click right now, and we merge to panorama. And you'll see right now it's creating a panorama preview. And let's have a look at this. And we can see this is what we're going to get. Now you can make these previews bigger if you want. So, if you wanted to drag it out so we could get a better look at what we're working on, let's do that right now. We can see, notice all the details not showing right now, but it's there. There's a lot more detail now in a regular photo, and you'll see in a second when we do those adjustments. So we've got 3 options. Spherical pretty much always works better. Right now we've got auto crop, and I'll show you why that's on. Because if you look at this, notice we get these little wavy things. It looks like a planet. You can see the 3 photos that have been put together. It's like one of those globes. Have you ever got one of those Earth globes and you flatten it out? That's kind of has that hemispherical thing. That's what's going on here because of the curvature of the lens. Now, auto crop, what it does is it gets rid of these transparent areas up here just by turning that on, and it'll just crop it down so we don't have to get rid of those. I have other tutorials where we'll go in there and we'll use content aware fill to fill that in Photoshop, which we could easily do. But I'm going to show you another option, and that's boundary warp. Boundary warp is really cool. If I pull this across, what it does is it stretches the photograph, kind of like You remember, silly putty, and you would stamp on it, or maybe you like gum, and have you ever seen that gum with comic books or whatever on it? And then as you stretch it, it kind of, shapeshifts, so to speak. And we can take this boundary warp and we can push it all the way up. Now, when we go to the full extremity, what's happening is we are not cropping off an entire pixel. It actually looks good. If it looks too warped, then reduce the amount of boundary warp. And now I'm just going to click merge. And once again, it wants me to save. Again, notice now it says HDR Pano, and this is an HDR and a panorama that we're saving. So it's time to do the last step, and that's to do some adjustments. Now, before we go in, I just got a quick question for you guys, because I know a lot of you are flying drones. A lot of you followed me for my drone stuff. Others are not flying drones. Some of you are just using regular cameras. Some of you are using mobile phones. Some of you are designers. I'm curious, what is your main camera? Is it a mobile phone? Is it a DSLR? Is it a drone? A 360 camera? Or do you just grab all your photos from Adobe stock? You don't even take photos? I'm really curious. Let me know in the comments underneath. All right, so moving along. What we're going to do now is we're going to make our adjustments. First thing I want to do is do our color temperature, because grass always looks nicer. This green, you just warm it up a little bit and boom, look at that. Suddenly we got rich grass. So one of the things I love to do is warm up the grass a little bit. Notice it's very foggy and hazy. I like this. This is a nice effect, but we can also go under the dehaze and we can cut through that a little bit if we like. And usually when you turn up the dehaze, you want to also turn up the exposure because it darkens the image a little bit. All right, so let's really go into the good stuff. I want to bring out some detail here in the clouds. I'm going to take these highlights and push them. And notice we start to see some detail here. And I might just take that exposure down just a little bit. There we go. And we can open up our shadow detail a little bit. There we go. Now let's take our whites just to clean it up. It's going to brighten it up. And we're going to take our blacks down to give it some body. Gives it contrast. See that? Looks very nice. Now we can also push the clarity up a little bit. And okay, so you're kind of here. And now if we look at this, we're starting to see a lot of detail there. It's starting to look very natural. We can go a little bit further though. If we want to push that detail a little bit more in the clouds, I'm going to do that right now. So what we want to do is we want to grab our gradient tool here. And then I'm just going to start above the top of these mountains, and I'm going to drag it down to about there. So watch this. As I click down, and if I hold the shift key, it'll constrain it. What I'm doing is I'm creating an area here where I can drop the exposure down, darken it. See that? Bring out the detail in those clouds. And let's take those highlights down, let it have a bit of pop, maybe give it some contrast there, looking good. I might even reduce the whites a little bit, make it a little more gray. Now, one of the things that's happening here is it's kind of going in there, and you can't see it, but let me turn the mask on. And if I change the color of this mask just by clicking on that little icon there, we can see the mask now and see how it's kind of going into these mountains. But we don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is go down here and under range mask, I'm going to change this to luminance. And luminance is darkness and lightness. So watch this area as I pull up the dark area. Notice that. It's getting us kind of weird halo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the smoothness. Notice if I go there, it creates a very soft look. If I go here, it's very, very harsh. And that's good because this enables me to see exactly, see that? Where we're getting off those edges right there. So we're right on the edges, and now I'm going to do the smoothness just to blend it a little, not too much, but just a little bit. There we go. And let's pull it back a little so it just goes into the mountains a little. See how it's just touching the edge of the mountains? And the reason I want to do that is so I don't get a halo, so I don't get a glow around the edges, because that's a sure sign that done a little bit of clumsy adjustments. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So why don't we turn off the mask and we can look at it. And if it looks a little bit like it's too much of a halo to you, well, that's fine. We can always just bring the exposure up and just reduce the effect a little bit. Okay, that's looking good. And at this point here, I can click done and it will just save that image out, or I can click open image and open it inside of Photoshop. So anyway, guys, that's basically the steps on how I put together an HDR panorama. I really hope you enjoyed this. And if you did, I've got lots more tutorials here. So consider hitting that subscribe button right now, and you'll get a new tutorial that I release every week, usually every Tuesday. And I also offer other tutorials on other days and some tech reviews and things like that too. If you like this tutorial, Smash that like button into dust. Don't forget to share this with your friends. There's a lot of people that don't know about Photoshop Cafe. Do them a solid. Let them know about our channel here, and I'm sure they'll really appreciate it, and maybe even buy you something nice for it. I doubt it. Most people don't. Drop a comment, guys. I'd love to hear from you. What would you like to learn next? Let me know. And until next time, I'll see you at the cafe.